good morning, or I guess afternoon now, everybody, depending on where you are. My name is Bush Williams with Accountability. We are here for a taking control of your cyber insurance webinar today through deployment of strong modern authentication. With us is Joseph Cook. Joseph comes to us as the practice group leader for the Arizona group. I'm going to let him do an intro here in just a minute. Also with us from the AIT side of the house is Robert Sandling, our solutions architect. Again, my name's Bush Williams. I am our director of Microsoft Business Development at AIT. I'll be kind of moderating things today. And I think with that, if we could, start with some introductions. So Rob, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Thank you, Bush. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rob Sandling, AIT Solutions Architect. I have a background in MSP provision services for 20 years. My experience base is mostly infrastructure, and today I'll be here working as an authentication specialist. It's good to meet you all.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. And Joseph, who is going to be leading the first phase of our webinar today. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself and then take it away, sir.
Certainly. Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Cook. I'm the practice group leader here at the Arizona Group for our Technology and Cyber Liability Practice Group. I'm also our liaison to the Arizona Technology Council. I've been in the insurance business for a little over 10 years at this point. All right, looks like we got our agenda. Wonderful. So I'll start with the latest cyber insurance trends, and you see the bullet points there, and then Rob will bookend me with identity and access management.
Great. All right.
For a little bit of setting the table, we'll talk about the origins of cyber liability. Relatively young product as far as insurance goes, being first launched in the late 90s, as you see there. Originally, it was third-party coverage only, which you'll see is no longer the case. It really didn't resemble the cyber liability products of today. It was much smaller in scope of coverage and really more resembled an E&O type product. AIG was the first offered in 1997. Then you had Chubb and Philly kind of step into the game prior to the Y2K event that was one of the biggest nothing burgers of all time. But that is the origins of cyber liability in a nutshell. State of the market, it's really interesting to see where it's gone in the last 10, 5, and 3 years. Certainly growth in all those time periods. When the pandemic occurred and you had a pretty significant shift to work from home, primarily to companies that were not very well prepared to work from home from a cybersecurity posture. While there was growth in the cyber liability market, there was also a significant influx of claims activity because of that level of new vulnerability for many small, medium, and even large enterprises. The good news is with us outside of that initial learning curve at this point, claim incidences are down holistically. They still remain high in certain industry verticals, but holistically they are down from the COVID years. Capacity is coming into the market, and unlike most of insurance right now, which remains relatively hard or challenging to find coverage or premiums in these things, cyber is one of the few coverages that's actually soft right now. So the ability to obtain coverage is a little bit easier than it's been. The ability to find reasonable premiums is a little bit easier than it's been. Terms and conditions, so on and so forth. So right now you've got roughly $17 billion in gross written premium globally, but that's expected to grow by over $10 billion to close to 29 or 30 billion by 2027. So that's a market segment here in insurance that's going to see a lot of attention and a lot of investment from reinsurance carriers, from insurance carriers, from agencies, brokers, the like. So it's certainly not anything that's going away, and it's certainly positioned to be better in its next iteration. So what is it? Well, today it's really three things, as you're seeing here. First party type coverages, and you see some but not all of them listed there. Those are coverages that would be incurred by the named insured. So if you're a policyholder or your enterprise or entity as a policyholder, you're the named insured. So those are costs that you would incur as the result of a breach event. So there's certainly things in there that are important to everybody, like reputational harm, potentially regulatory fines, things of that nature, extortion. But also for certain use cases, if you're really hardware heavy, breaking could be of more importance to you than someone who's not very hardware heavy, right? So certainly want to address the items on the first party side that make sense to you. Third party, these are costs that are incurred by parties in your atmosphere as a result of the breach event that occurred on your network or server. So if you have a vendor or a customer or vendors or customers or anything like that were harmed by the breach event, these are the costs that you owe to them. And these will be spoken to by state law, by federal law. If you've got privacy acts like, the California Consumer Privacy Act, or if you're subject to GDPR or things of that nature, all these will be a part of that consideration. And then finally, you have cyber crime, and that's the electronic movement of money. So that's things like funds transfer fraud, push payment fraud, invoice manipulation, social engineering, phishing, all those kinds of things. What forms does cyber liability insurance take in the wild? Well, there's really three forms. So here's the first one. Endorsement based. So this is a bolt-on version to an existing policy. Most often, as you see, it's the general liability. This is a significantly truncated version of this coverage that we do not recommend to anything other than incredibly small enterprise, generally owner-only type enterprises, right? So it's truncated in two ways. One, you're going to see a lot less coverage conditions or triggers that allow you to access your coverage. And then two, you're going to see a lot less limit. So while it's always going to be very low cost, these are typically $50, $100, $150 a year, the value exchange is incredibly low and doesn't provide any meaningful coverage to most small or medium enterprises. Next version is going to be standalone. So this would be a independent cyber liability policy, which applies to a lot of industry verticals. But as you'll see on the next slide, there's some industry verticals where a blended policy is more appropriate. These are what we recommend to most small and medium enterprises or large enterprises. These typically have 10 to 15 coverage conditions that can allow you to trigger your policy. Typically, limits are going to start at $1 million. You can build limits as high as you want. Most carriers won't give you more than a $5 million tranche at one single time. So if you need more than $5 million in limit, you're going to be building a tower or a shared and layered situation where you have carriers in position going over the top of each other. But right now in the market, $3 million is pretty easily obtainable without a whole lot of call for high-level cybersecurity postures for any company under $100 million in gross revenues. So it's fairly soft right now. So if you're a company over under $100 million gross revenues and you're looking for $1 to $3 million in limit, if you're having a hard time obtaining that, that's not really what the market's yielding in general, right? These are higher value and in many cases surprisingly affordable, especially if you have some flexibility on your deductible. Lastly, you have your blended policies. So this really was born out of technology companies, the services that they provide, whether it be SaaS, MSPs, MSSPs, so on and so forth. And the reason these blended policies were created was it can be very hard until forensic IT occurs to determine where the product or service stopped from the tech company and where the breach event began. Right. So these blended policies were put together to try to address that concern and not leave policyholders with gaps or potential rooms for error where coverage would not be applied because those two things were not dovetailed together. While it started with technology providers, you're seeing a bleed over into a lot of other professional service providers. So you're starting to see things like lawyers or doctors or accountants or similar architects, engineers also have blended forms that include their professional liability and the cyber liability together on one policy. Again, these typically have a similar level of coverage conditions. They typically start at 1 million, and you can, and certainly in most cases, achieve 3 to 5 million in limit without a whole lot of legwork. And again, these are higher value, particularly to those in those professional services industries where these specialized products are available. Are all coverages equal? No, absolutely not. Within the insurance industry, there are different segments of the market, most often referred to as admitted and not admitted, or standard and non-standard. And there's a bit of a misnomer with the youth of cyber liability, and also the dynamic nature of cyber liability risk. So with many coverages, we'll use general liability as an example, that have been around for a very long time and that are heavily regulated, and that regulation has been tested over and over again. And there's a baseline form by the insurance services offices, the ISO, that creates a relative baseline expectation on coverage. Those admitted forms, because they're so heavily regulated, do not often have the ability to be reactive enough and change enough and be nimble enough to respond to the dynamic risk that is cyber liability. There's always new threat vectors all the time. There's always issues with certain software pieces, so on and so forth. So to wait on insurance regulation to approve new forms to respond to that doesn't really put you in a great position. So while a lot of lines you would prefer to have an admitted or a standard policy, right now, based on how the insurance industry works and the dynamic nature of cyber risk, you would actually prefer to have a non-admitted or a non-standard policy, because they have a lot more flexibility to keep up with the high dynamic nature of the risk. In addition to that, you can have very different legalese within the policy, particularly as it relates to representation and warranty clauses. So for those that are not aware, a representation or warranty clause is in every insurance policy that you've ever bought. And essentially, it's a statement where the insurance carrier says, we received certain information to underwrite the policy that we presented to you, and that information allowed us to generate these terms and conditions at this premium and limit. In the event that we find out that information was not correct, here's how we might handle that situation at a time of a claim. So there are carriers out there that have incredibly favorable representations and warranty clauses, where they actually demand that they are able to draw a causal link that you knowingly led them to harm, or they cannot deny the claim. There are carriers that are not favorable at all, that have the ability to void a policy ab initio, even if they feel like you potentially miscommunicated in an aspirational or potentially uneducated way. So the legalese can vary quite a bit, as can the sublimits, as can the value-added services, general policy language, etc. You just really can't take a one-size-fits-all approach on this type of coverage, because everybody has a unique risk as it relates to cyber liability. How to obtain coverage. So for a long time, there was what we'll call the conventional process, what I like to call the artificial process, where prior to real underwriting occurring in this market, and prior to large incidents occurring at regularity, the artificial market was essentially, what's your name, what's your address, maybe what are your gross revenues, and do you have a pulse? And then here's a quote for $1,100, $1,200, $1,300 a year, regardless of the size of your enterprise. That's obviously gone away to an application-based process. That had some early hiccups, and it had some speed bumps. Insurance carriers are not cybersecurity companies, so they were following a lot of threat vectors, right? They started to glom onto hot button issues like MFA or data encryption or redundancy on backups and frequency on backups, things that were known to be threat vectors. So they started to glom onto these things, but they were asking questions in a way that definitely iterated that they didn't necessarily understand the question that they were asking to the level of detail that they may receive on a response, right? So this certainly caused some friction and some rub early on in that application-based process, but it also ended up providing a high level of value in a couple of ways. One, with real underwriting occurring, they were able to course correct, and that's why part of the reason why this market segment remains soft, right? Because they are underwriting in a more meaningful way. Now, B, they have engaged cyber security firms that have lent them their professional opinions on why they might be asking these questions, how to maybe phrase those questions better, how to interpret the answers or understand the answers to those questions better. So that's getting a little bit better. And then finally, it's allowing them to reserve, better pricing structures and better terms and condition structures for those clients that are doing things right. So for those clients that are out there taking cybersecurity seriously and putting forth at least what they should for an enterprise of their size, or potentially more than what they'd be required to for an enterprise of their size, they're receiving those more favorable terms and conditions, those more favorable premiums, because they're underwriting for those things. So it was a little bit of a hiccup or a speed bump initially, but I think ultimately it's proved its value 3 or 4 years into the application-based process at this time. Couple of prompts, if you will, on considering your risks. We have a lot of folks that, from a perspective of their industry vertical, may not think that they're necessarily exposed to cyber risk, but the reality is, if you're connected to the internet, you are in some form or fashion. There's certainly other control questions that we want to ask, and certainly other things that will drive us to different recommendations on your behalf. But if you're connected to the internet, you do have cyber risk. A good friend of mine in the cybersecurity industry often refers to the fact that there are only 2 types of companies now, those that know they've been hacked and those that don't, because everybody has been hacked. It's just whether or not you know, which I find to be humorous, right? Nevertheless, these are some great questions that you could be asking yourself, or that your insurance agent should be asking you as you look to place and right-size your cyber liability insurance coverage. Where do you go from here? So I often find that in these webinars, there's a lot of posturing about very technical components of cyber liability insurance, which of course has its time and place, right? But you'll see the reason I structured the presentation this way is I think that there's a practical level of knowledge that small and medium enterprise owners or C-suite members or controllers are probably a little bit more wanting to be present in the marketplace. So after you receive some baseline information about what it is, where it's going, how it functions in general, where do you go? How do you obtain it? All those different types of things. So the first thing I encourage is engage with a professional who's a subject matter expert. This is not an old coverage. This is not something that all agencies or agents understand. So if you're not feeling a level of confidence in the expert that you're currently working with, find a different one. Provide the necessary information, and do so in a way that it accurately reflects who you are today. Don't answer application questions aspirationally. Answer them true and honest. I know that there's some fear that may disqualify you from coverage, but again, obtaining coverage up to $3 million in limit for anything under $100 million in gross revenues is relatively simplistic at this time, and there's not a lot of disqualifying factors. Even above those thresholds, limit or gross revenues, there's certainly things that they're going to want you to potentially enact within 30 or 60 or 90 days. Things they may give you up to a year to enact. They may have tools or resources that allow you to do that at a discount. So I would always encourage people to provide that necessary information and provide it in a way that's accurate for your current status as a company. Analyze the options in front of you. There should be options. When we provide options to our clients, we have a proprietary method of spreadsheeting or comparing up to 19 carriers in real time. So you should be getting some level of options. Make the best choice for you at that time, and then revisit that periodically. That could be annually, that could be every 3 months, every 6 months. Obviously, as your company grows and changes and you add new products or go into new states, you'll have new risks that potentially could arise from that. So make the best choice for you at the time, and then revisit that as much as seems needed for the growth and trajectory of your company. Couple of closing thoughts. I always like to share with people, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. I see a lot of analysis paralysis in this space, where people are a little bit disappointed they can't be perfect now, so then they don't get started. Start. Make small incremental changes. Pay for the cybersecurity that you can afford. Try to be resourceful with your spend. Try to get high value items that are within your budget going now, and then continue to refine it. It's a continuous refinement process anyway. It's not a checkbox, right? It's an ongoing loop. It's an ongoing feedback loop. Learn how to ask good questions. This is dynamic risk. the answers of today may not be the answers of tomorrow. So if you're really comfortable just feeling like you have the answers, cyber risk will probably give you a nice surprise at some point. So the best way to curb that is learning how to ask good questions so you can get to good, valuable answers at that current time. And then just remember, that there are professionals out there for a reason, and engage them. Certainly you have to find somebody that you trust, that you like to work with, but this is a complex subject matter, so find those professionals and make good use of them.
All right. As we move, thank you so much, Joseph. Really appreciate that. And for everyone in attendance, if you have any questions, again, just want to promote anyone to put them into the chat. We appreciate any interaction we can get during this session. As we move from Joseph providing us insurance information to the next part, which is modernization of identity and access management. Rob is going to walk us through his presentation, beginning with the pillars of zero trust, and then after that we will wrap with a Q&A. Again, I would encourage everyone to start thinking up some questions. We'd appreciate it at the end, and I think we have a somewhat of a giveaway, maybe in the form of a Starbucks card for those that do have a question for us. So keep that in mind. And with that, Rob, if you would like to take it away, that'd be great.
Thank you, Bush. So we start here a little bit of groundwork, because the question that's on everyone's mind is, how do I secure my enterprise? The model that's on your screen right now, the 6 pillars of zero trust, is a younger model relative to what many organizations have been used to. We used to organize ourselves using a walled garden approach. Many of you have probably heard of using a firewall for providing a perimeter to a building, and then we have all of our protected assets inside that protected perimeter, and that is how we kind of keep the bad guys out. But in a cloud world, that model doesn't really work. We need to protect users regardless of where they are and how they connect. We need to protect assets as they travel. And this concept, this flow, makes heavy use of the internet, and so we needed a better model. This is where zero trust comes from. As you look at this building and you see those 6 pillars, the one thing about this particular graphic that isn't quite so obvious is that you need to go from left to right. If we start with identity, we move to devices, we move to applications, we move to data, then we move to infrastructure, then we move to networks. And there's a reason for that. Today, my comments are going to be focused on the identity pillar, the first pillar, because there's always work that needs to be done there. And as Joseph mentioned earlier, this is very much a journey. Security is a process, not a product. It is a function of habit. It's not something you can get right. It's not possible to be perfect at right off the bat. No organization is perfect. Every organization has more work it needs to do, no matter where it is along this pathway. So, just to kind of reinforce what he mentioned previously, do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That decision paralysis is fatal in this space. We have to get started at some point. And even if it doesn't get you to where you wish to be, we've got to get started, and you have to, start somewhere. So again, we're gonna start with some identities, and the comments I'm making are going to be focused on Microsoft products, as my expertise in Entra ID and Active Directory give me some familiarity that I can express some comments here. But from a general level, these comments do apply to any identity service that you may have available that you may be using. So why identities start? Well, look at that pie chart. That itty bitty little slice, that little less than 1%, that's the piece everybody thinks of when they think hacking. That's the Matrix movie. That's the hard stuff. That's where the attacker's actually doing something to target your people. The rest of that pie is somebody guessed somebody's password, because passwords are just that weak. To be frank, they've never been a great form of authentication. They really haven't. We've been using them forever, but they're just not good. In the modern world, they're becoming less good by the second. The password spray capabilities of an organization is directly connected to its GPU processing power, its parallel processing power. These are GPUs. These are the same technology that we're using today to power AI. NVIDIA is a giant in this space. They're making better product by the day. And just 5 years ago, I could pull a website up that tests the strength of a password, and I could put a 14-character mixed case, cat jumped on the keyboard style gibberish password into that box and come back with a length of time that would take to just brute force this measured in the centuries. Today, that same password is broken in months. Tomorrow, it will be broken in seconds. We have to get past passwords. But in the meantime, they're what we're using. Just about every system has it in place. And these passwords are attached to identity. They're inextricable. So we usually start there, and we got some techniques that we can manage that with. But before we get into more specifics, we're going to move on to the next phase of this. So Bush, can we go to 17, please? Because this is the other angle. This is how cheap it is to break into something. These threat vectors are automatic. As Bush mentioned previously, it's always changing. As the capabilities of our defenders are upgrading by the second, so too are the attackers. Unfortunately, it's always harder to defend than it is to attack. It's just the nature of defense. And just as our capabilities improve every day, the attack vectors improve every day, the economies of scale at work in the dark web and the black markets of the world are constantly driving these prices down. I have seen personally email address identities that are valid in corporate entities in lists at as little as $50 a piece. If I want to break into your organization, all I have to do is pull out my credit card and swipe, and I can get identities right now. Which is why we need a whole different way of handling this. And again, these pillars of zero trust, identity matters, and identity is most simplistic, a living, breathing ledger of the people in your organization. Who is in your estate? If we don't know who, we'll never be able to answer how or why. And how or why are the questions we have to answer in order to construct a secure environment. We must understand to proceed. Next slide, please, Bush. So to that end, again, we're going to take a bit of a shift. This is Microsoft-focused components. In this particular case, we're going to look at Entra ID specifically. Entra ID is the directory technology that underpins Microsoft's Office 365 platform. This is the platform that we're delivering the webinar on today, as we're doing this through Teams internally. So we're subject to this as an organization ourselves. And within Entra ID, its primary access control mechanism is known as conditional access policy. These policies allow administrators to define when certain authentication methods would be applied, the authentication methods themselves, what we can use, when they're going to be used, and when we're going to tighten the security down. In certain contexts, we may require more. In other contexts, we may require less. The goal of this process is to, in general, to start, again, we use starting line. We have a baseline configuration that we implement. We must enforce multi-factor authentication. And again, at this stage, we don't care what multi-factor authentication method is in use. Even as relatively weak as text messaging to a cell phone, it's still better than nothing. But we need to enforce this universally, uniformly, and across all users, all guests, all administrators. We must specifically disable legacy authentication methods. Many platforms will allow for compatibility purposes these older access models, but unfortunately, these older access mechanisms do not support MFA. So if we allow for legacy authentication, we are providing the threat actors a ready way to simply say, yeah, I don't feel like MFAing today. And then all the work we did doesn't mean anything anymore. The final and commonly overlooked standard policy that we recommend is to secure security info registration. In Microsoft speak, this is a specific process that revolves around the enrollment of authentication tokens themselves. To start, we implement a policy that is logging only. We generally don't try to control that process as much because, again, we're trying to get users into this program, try to get them used to it, get them comfortable with it. We're not so much trying to control it just yet. But as an organization matures, it may make sense, especially those that are subject to regulation because they have PHI or PII information. That's a personal health information or just personal information in general. Regulation applies. We may, as an organization, say, we want to make sure that these users are only capable of resetting their authentication tokens when they're connecting from this trusted physical location, the office, the headquarters, one of the branch locations. We don't want them to be able to reset these tokens when they're out traveling the world because, well, when John decided to go on vacation to Japan and lose his cell phone and, a threat actor started logging in China the next morning, we don't really want John just resetting his tokens there because we don't necessarily know that the John that we're talking to is the real one. Again, we have to adapt to the future. Artificial intelligence is in this mix as well, and you will see references to deepfakes. It is not as difficult as it once was. In fact, I can do it with an app on my cell phone, given a sample of Joseph's voice here that we've had here from this very presentation. I can take that recording and his face, and I can talk into my phone and appear to be him very convincingly, very quickly. We have to think about that. So that gets us down to our execution. We need that universal deployment. We need to document our exceptions to these policies. We need to understand why we have them. And we need to review the liability associated with those exceptions, because some of those exceptions bring with them risk that is huge and often unconsidered. We very frequently will bypass MFA for scan-to-email functionality, for example. I have an Office copier here to my right, just through the wall. It can scan documents and email them to me, but the nature of how it does so is inherently unsafe. We have to make special consideration for that. But we also need to make sure that access mechanism is limited to this facility. Otherwise, a threat actor can use it to spam all of our people. And now we're enabling spear phishing. The risks snowball. Because we are online as an organization, so too are the threat actors. And again, it comes back to who is accessing our equipment, how, and why. Once we understand those three things, we can react to the information the platform is telling us. And this configuration baseline, these four basics, will provide a Microsoft tenant with telemetry to start that informing process. Next slide, please. So that gets us into, we'll get into some Entra ID licensing considerations. With Microsoft products in the M365 space, there are four distinct Entra ID licensing levels. There's the free version, which you get just by opening a tenant. You can create an account and start working in Microsoft Azure. Right now, it costs nothing, and you get an identity structure. You get Entra ID. That's how it tracks logins for your estate. There is certain functionality associated with that. It's relatively limited, but that's where you get started. The next step up is the M365 variant. This is an upgraded set of functionality that comes to any Entra ID estate that has any licensed M365 services attached to it. This is going to be the license and configuration level that is available to any organization that is operating under Business Basic, Business Standard, or any of the O365 level subscriptions in the enterprise queue space. As moving up from there, we have Entra ID P1 and Entra ID P2. Entra ID P1 is the minimum acceptable licensing level for any enabled account in an M365 estate today. That licensing That license gives us the ability to perform the conditional access policies that I just described. Without that license, we have no conditional access entitlement. Without that entitlement, we have no ability to control the login process. We are instead limited to Microsoft's provided security defaults. And Microsoft security defaults, while fairly complete in the sense that they touch on all of the basic items that I mentioned previously, they distinctly do not enforce the use of user-level MFA. They will enforce your users to enroll in MFA, but it will not enforce their use of the MFA on access to the platform unless the platform detects risk. But we don't have control over the risk-based sign-on. The risk-based sign-on comes with Entra ID P2. That's your full enterprise security suite. You will need specialists to fully implement this, but Entra ID P2 is a very powerful place where, as an administrator, I can say, Rob, you're an administrator for this state. You access this, you control this, you take care of this organization. That's your job. You will not have administrative rights. You will have the ability to elevate yourself to administrative rights. And when you do so, these additional authentication requirements are required. So I would, as that administrator even, be able to access my email using a standard MFA check. But should my account come under attack, the platform flag it as at risk. The risk-based policies can then dial the security up. I need a second level of authentication. Maybe that's a security check with a phone call. Maybe that's another email. Another form of authentication is layered on. Then to escalate to administrative privilege level to perform an admin task using the privilege information management system and feature of Entra ID P2, I can then appoint within the organization a review board. And if I should need that level of access, I then need to complete my conditional access process, which may include truly strong MFA with a FIDO2 key. It's a USB device that is a security token that you physically have to have. I may have to have that just to open the ticket. But the ticket within the system doesn't give me administrative rights. It puts me in front of the review board. The review board then approves that. Once the approval process is complete, I am then elevated to gain that additional permission. I can perform my administrative task with the administrative access rights, and then on completion or a time expiration, my access rights are then terminated. This whole configuration designed to provide for the assumption that my credentials have already been stolen. And should they be stolen, how do I prevent improper access and change to the environment? All of this is huge. And again, you have to start somewhere. So this is where we get to this slide here. Think about the privileges your people need. Use phishing-resistant MFA when possible. We need risk-based sign-on monitoring to counter that 1%. But all of the above doesn't really work if you do not adhere to the last two bullet points on this slide. We must review these regularly. We must constantly review every one. And that is the core of the strength of your identity pillar. The list of people that access your estate is all contained there. What can they access? When can they access it? Where can they access it? How can they access it? Document it. Understand it. And once you do as an organization, you'll be better equipped to communicate with specialists like ours so we can implement that strategic vision and protection to put the shields up around your organization and prevent these threat actors from doing the damage that they do. It's all in Pillar 1. And we haven't even gotten to Pillar 2 where the devices come in. There's even more magic involved there. But there's a great deal of power and strength in just knowing who. And that's where we start. Well, I think that's our last slide, Bush. And we're a bit early.
Sure is. Thank you. Rob, that was great presentation, really informative. I think if we have any, haven't seen one come through yet, but if there's any questions for Rob or Joseph, now would be a great time to put those into the chat. So I'll just wait here for a sec to see if anything comes in. The first question is, what's your take on paying a ransom or not? Joseph, is that, why don't we start with you there on that one? I think that's probably more up your alley.
Sure. So I want to make sure that the answer is scoped or defined correctly. So we're an insurance brokerage firm, right? So we represent our clients to the overall marketplace, the insurance marketplace, and insurance carriers would make a decision on whether or not to pay a ransomware. So with that clarified, paying ransomware is a challenging proposition from the onset, right? You're ultimately placing a level of trust in a criminal actor that if you pay them a dollar amount or a sum of money that they have requested, that after that they will be an honorable person and make good on the exchange, right? They'll provide your data back, they'll provide your systems back, they'll evict themselves from your system, and they won't try to attack you again, which is a precarious arrangement from the onset. That said, there are business level decisions that may come into play on whether or not to pay that ransomware, right? So certainly if you're looking at issues of prolonged downtime without paying the ransomware because you don't have the capability to evict them and to enact redundancy and things of these natures, that's going to be a consideration on behalf of not only your organization but on behalf of the carrier. Aside from prolonged downtime, if the ask is not particularly high in some cases against what policy limit may be available, it could be looked at as potentially like a nuisance payment just to get them away and get you back to business. So there's a lot of considerations to be made, but I certainly understand the level of concern on the onset that, again, you're trusting a criminal actor to be an honorable person after you've made that payment to them, which is certainly scary, and there can certainly be complications that could arise if they don't turn out to be that honorable person after that payment is made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's going to come down to a case by case basis. But I think we typically see it's pretty split, from what we see in the industry. It, to your point, just comes down to if you need to expedite getting the data back, or frankly just how over a barrel they have you as a result of the attack, based on things like immutable backups and availability of data and whatnot. So hopefully that helps you with your question, TJ.
There's sophistication to it. I'll give you a quick little example. There was a large employment agency here that was providing professional staffing, quite a bit of professional staffing throughout the Southwest region. And I had lunch with their risk manager just last week. And at the time that he was there as their risk manager, they were breached 3 days before they were about to process 21,000 W-2s for the year. So clearly, wow, the actor knew that they were about to process all their W-2s for all the staffing they'd done for the year, and that they had them pretty well over a barrel. So you certainly can't, not issue those W-2s in a timely manner, because there's a lot of issues there from a federal and state regulation level. So despite the fact that they're criminals, that doesn't mean they're not necessarily sophisticated in their attacks.
Yeah, and also speaking of the lack of sophistication, and Rob could probably back me up on this a little bit, we also find that we hear stories about how these are professional organizations with, some of them even going as far as to have customer support reps if your keys aren't working and things like that. What I would say is that I think there's some, I think that totes the line of urban legend versus reality in a lot of cases. In many cases, in fact, AIT being a security, we build and manage security solutions for our customers. We find that a lot of these organizations botch the job. In fact, the last 2 organizations that came to us mid-breach, the bad actor made mistakes in each of those cases that led to not only not getting the data back, but us having to go in and basically re-architect all of their, moving from hybrid to Azure native identity and whatnot, because the threat actor actually broke replication, which caused us to not be able to save anything, right? So you don't want to be at the mercy of these folks, I think, which is the main point, right? Which is Joseph has the ability to place everyone with a provider with a solution for when you need it, to know that you're protected. But ideally, we want that to be a nice to have. In the event that happens, we don't want to. We obviously don't want to use it if we don't have to.
Yeah.
We all need cyber insurance. Nobody wants to use it, right? And I think that's why we synergize so well on this call. Is AIT? We are a firm that basically deploys Microsoft Sentinel for our customers. So we're building a SIM and a SOAR for our customers in their subscription, so they own it. And leveraging all the value of the Microsoft investment you've already made to bring all of those security tools to bear. So many of the methodologies and tools that Rob mentioned today, those are all sort of in the toolkit that we're putting together for our customers to ensure that they have not only 24/7 security, but also a level of grooming, tuning, optimization, and an evergreen environment. Because as the threat vector and the landscape changes, so too must the security platform. And so that's kind of at the root for anyone wondering about AIT that may not be familiar with us, of what we do. I think that here on this last slide, as we don't appear to have any more questions, you'll find my contact information. Again, my name's Bush Williams. My phone numbers and my email are there. If exploring additional security through the Microsoft licensing that you're already paying for is something you're interested in, I would love to speak with you. Feel free to reach out anytime. And Joseph, I guess if you wouldn't mind just wrapping us up here with again, how to contact you, what you provide, and we will end the session.
Sure. Yeah. If you want to scan the QR code there, you should have my digital business card. And then I'll close this with a little bit of imagery that I think does a great job of displaying the synergy that you'd like to have between your MSSP, your cybersecurity provider, and your insurance agent and your insurance policy, which is this. I often think of cybersecurity as walking a tightrope, right? So your MSSP is going to help you understand how to walk that tightrope. You're going to get the right shoes. You're going to learn how to hold the balance beam. You're not going to go too fast. You're not going to go too slow. You're going to stop when you need to stop, but you're not going to stop when you shouldn't stop. All these different things, right? So they're teaching you from compliance and frameworks and systems and people and all these different things, how to walk that tightrope. But the reality is occasionally you might fall. So the cyber liability insurance that should be provided by your agency becomes that properly rated and properly sized net that's going to catch you if you do fall off that tightrope. I think that's a good way to describe the synergy between our organizations and how our
Absolutely.
clients are best served when we exercise that synergy.
That's well said. Absolutely. And Joseph, just one more time, as far as best way to contact you, you've got the QR code here. And what would be a good example of someone who's evaluating or curious about their cyber insurance, where they currently stand? Like, what would be a common question that someone in attendance might have that would lead them to you? What's a good example of where someone may be on this journey that would be a good place for them to reach out to you?
Sure. Two easy situations. If you don't have a policy, you probably should, and let's talk about it. And if you do have a policy, you probably have a lot of questions, and you probably don't feel like you understand it a whole lot. So let's get a copy of that policy and let's schedule a time to talk about it together and see if it really maps to the expectations that you have for it and to the needs that you have from the risk exposure you incur from operating your entity.
Great. Thank you so much. If there are no more questions, then that is the material that we have for today. The recording will be shared to everyone in attendance right after we end up here. And appreciate everyone's time, and hope for an opportunity to maybe work with some of you as we move on down the road. Thank you all very much, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.